The captain's voice rang out sharp and dismissive. "This is first class. If you don't belong here, I'll have you moved immediately." Passengers turned to watch as Alicia, calm and composed, looked up from her seat. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she replied firmly. No one expected what came next. The black woman he tried to intimidate wasn't just any passenger. What she revealed left him stunned and the entire cabin in silence. If you believe accountability matters, hit subscribe now and let us know where you're watching from. The sun was setting over the tarmac, casting golden hues on the sleek private jet parked at Gate C7. Inside the terminal, passengers milled about, some sipping coffee, others scrolling through their phones. Among them was Dr. Alicia Harper, a striking black woman in her early 40s, dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit. Her calm demeanor and piercing gaze suggested confidence and experience, though she wasn't one to flaunt it. Alicia adjusted her carry-on bag as she approached the check-in counter. The attendant smiled politely. "Good evening, Dr. Harper. Welcome aboard. You're seated in first class, 1A. "Thank you," Alicia replied with a polite nod. She appreciated professionalism and efficiency, and everything so far seemed routine, but little did she know this flight would be anything but ordinary. The cabin was buzzing as passengers boarded the flight. The first-class section was sleek and luxurious, with plush leather seats and ample space. Alicia found her seat easily and settled in, placing her briefcase in the overhead compartment. She had a long week ahead, business meetings, research presentations, and an important conference, but for now she welcomed the chance to unwind during the flight. As she prepared for takeoff, she noticed the captain stepping out of the cockpit to speak with the crew. Captain Logan Pierce was in his mid-50s, a tall man with a commanding presence. His crisp uniform and no-nonsense attitude gave him an air of authority. But Alicia couldn't help but notice the way his eyes scanned the first-class cabin. His gaze lingered for a moment when he spotted her, his expression tightening ever so slightly before he turned away. Odd, she thought, but brushed it off. Shortly before takeoff, the lead flight attendant approached Alicia with an apologetic smile. "Dr. Harper, I'm sorry, but there seems to have been a mix-up with your seat. The captain has requested that you move to another section of the plane." Alicia raised an eyebrow, her voice calm but firm. "A mix-up? My seat was confirmed at check-in, and I'm seated exactly where I'm supposed to be. Why would I need to move?" The flight attendant hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not sure of the details, ma'am. I'm just following instructions." Alicia took a deep breath. She wasn't one to make a scene, but something about this didn't sit right with her. "Please inform the captain that I will remain in my assigned seat unless there's a legitimate reason for me to move." Moments later, Captain Pierce himself appeared, his expression stern. He approached Alicia, his tone clipped. "Ma'am, this section is reserved for first-class passengers." Alicia's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm aware. That's why I'm here." "My ticket confirms my seat in first class." Captain Pierce crossed his arms. "I'm asking you to move. We'll reassign your seat to another section." Alicia's tone remained steady, though her patience was wearing thin. "I paid for this seat. If there's an issue, I suggest you explain it clearly. Otherwise, I'll remain where I am." Passengers nearby began to take notice, their murmurs filling the cabin. "You're disrupting the boarding process," Captain Pierce said sharply. "And you're making assumptions," Alicia replied evenly. "This is my seat, and I have no intention of giving it up simply because you're uncomfortable with my presence." The tension in the cabin thickened as the standoff continued. Captain Pierce's face reddened, his frustration evident. But before he could respond, Alicia calmly reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small folder. "Captain Pierce," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the other passengers, "before you escalate this further, I'd advise you to take a look at these documents." She handed him the folder, her gaze unwavering. The captain hesitated, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion as he opened the file. His eyes scanned the pages quickly, and the color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. Alicia leaned back in her seat, her expression unreadable. Let's just say I have access to information you'd rather keep private. But don't worry, Captain. I'd hate to ruin your flight. Shall we proceed with takeoff? Captain Pierce stood frozen, the folder clutched in his hands. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder as passengers speculated about what was happening. But Alicia remained calm, her composed demeanor unshaken. Whatever was in that folder, it was clear that Captain Pierce had just been exposed, and Alicia Harper wasn't someone to underestimate. Captain Pierce's hand trembled slightly as he flipped through the contents of the folder. Each page seemed to pale his already ashen complexion further. The passengers in the first-class cabin had gone silent, their curiosity mounting as they watched the tense exchange. Alicia Harper sat calmly, her piercing gaze locked on the captain. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone spoke volumes. This wasn't a standoff. This was a reckoning. "Where did you get this?" Captain Pierce demanded again, though his voice had lost much of its earlier authority. Alicia tilted her head slightly. "Let's just say I've been doing my homework. These are official records, Captain. Complaints, reports, and investigations, all linked to you." The tension in the cabin thickened as Pierce's jaw tightened. He glanced around, suddenly aware of the passengers' stares. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "You don't know what you're talking about." Alicia leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but cutting. "I know enough. 3 formal complaints filed by crew members, 2 pending lawsuits, and 1 ongoing investigation into workplace misconduct. Need I continue?" Pierce's eyes darted toward the cockpit door, his panic barely contained. "This isn't the time or place." "Oh, but it is," Alicia interrupted smoothly. "You see, I wasn't just assigned to investigate you. I was asked to fly on this very plane to observe your behavior firsthand. I thought I'd remain a silent observer, but you made that impossible when you decided to single me out." The weight of her words settled over the cabin like a thundercloud. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, whispers growing louder as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Pierce's frustration boiled over, and he stepped closer to Alicia's seat, his voice low and sharp. "You're out of line." Alicia met his glare with unwavering calm. "No, Captain. You are out of line. You've spent years using your position to intimidate and dismiss people who you thought wouldn't fight back, but I'm not one of them." She gestured to the folder in his hand. "Every word in that file has been verified, and trust me, once I present my findings to the board, your time as captain will be over." The passengers couldn't contain their curiosity any longer. One leaned toward another, whispering, "Did she just say he's under investigation?" Another murmured, "She's not just any passenger. Who is she?" The lead flight attendant, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease, finally stepped forward. "Captain Pierce, is everything all right?" she asked cautiously. Pierce's face reddened further as he handed the folder back to Alicia, his movements stiff and mechanical. "Return to your seat," he snapped at the attendant. But Alicia spoke up before the attendant could respond. "Actually, I think it's best if she stays," she said, her tone firm. "Transparency is important, after all." The attendant froze, torn between her loyalty to the captain and the undeniable authority in Alicia's voice. Pierce took a step back, his composure crumbling. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, louder now, as if trying to salvage his reputation in front of the passengers. "You've got it all wrong." Alicia stood, her presence commanding the room. "Do I? Let's ask the board when we land. Oh, and before you try to spin this, remember, every word we've exchanged is being recorded." She gestured subtly toward her bag, where a recording device was tucked away. Pierce's face turned a shade paler. "You can't—" "Oh, I can," Alicia said sharply. "And I already have." The flight attendant cleared her throat nervously. "Perhaps we should focus on the flight for now." Alicia nodded, her composure never faltering. "By all means. I have no intention of jeopardizing the safety of the passengers. Captain Pierce, if you'd like to continue this discussion, we can do so after landing, with legal counsel present." Pierce hesitated, his mind clearly racing for a way out. Finally, he turned abruptly and retreated to the cockpit, slamming the door behind him. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder as Alicia calmly sat back in her seat, retrieving her tablet from her bag. The passengers around her couldn't help but stare, their curiosity boiling over. One man seated across the aisle leaned toward her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said hesitantly. Are you with the airline?" Alicia gave him a polite smile. "You could say that." As the plane ascended into the sky, Alicia felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She hadn't planned to confront Pierce this way, but she couldn't stand by and let his behavior go unchecked. This wasn't just about her. It was about holding people accountable, regardless of their title or position. Her phone buzzed softly, a reminder of the meeting waiting for her after landing. This flight was just the beginning. The truth about Captain Pierce was about to come to light, and Alicia was determined to ensure that justice was served. The plane landed smoothly on the tarmac, but the tension in the first-class cabin was anything but calm. Captain Pierce remained holed up in the cockpit, avoiding eye contact with passengers and crew as the plane taxied to the gate. Meanwhile, Alicia Bennett sat quietly in her seat, her composed demeanor hiding the storm brewing inside her mind. As the seatbelt sign turned off and passengers began gathering their belongings, whispers filled the cabin. Everyone knew something extraordinary had just unfolded, though few understood the full scope of what had transpired. Alicia calmly reached for her bag, retrieving her phone to send a quick message to the airline's legal department. The wheels of accountability were already in motion. As passengers filed off the plane, Alicia remained seated, waiting for the cabin to clear. Just as she prepared to stand, the cockpit door opened and Captain Pierce emerged. His face was a mix of anger and desperation, his usual commanding presence nowhere to be seen. He approached Alicia cautiously, his voice lowered so only she could hear. "Ms. Bennett, let's not blow this out of proportion," he said, forcing a strained smile. "We can handle this privately without involving the board." Alicia raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Privately? After you tried to humiliate me in front of an entire cabin of passengers? After everything I've documented in that file? I don't think so." Pierce's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the full picture. My career is on the line. And so was the dignity of every crew member and passenger you've mistreated over the years," Alicia shot back. "This isn't just about you, Captain Pierce. This is about accountability." As Alicia exited the plane, she was met by two figures waiting at the gate, an airline executive and a legal representative. Both wore grim expressions, clearly aware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. "Ms. Bennett," the executive greeted her, offering a handshake. "We've been informed of the situation. Would you mind joining us in the conference room? We'd like to hear your account before taking action." Alicia nodded. "Of course, but let me be clear. Action needs to be taken. There's no room for people like Captain Pierce to abuse their authority in this airline." The executive glanced nervously toward the plane, where Captain Pierce had just stepped off. His face paled when he saw the group waiting for him. Inside the airline's conference room, Alicia laid out her case with precision. She presented the documents she had compiled, detailing the complaints, lawsuits, and ongoing investigations into Pierce's behavior. The executives listened intently, their faces growing darker with each revelation. Alicia didn't hold back, recounting the moment Pierce singled her out on the flight and attempted to remove her from her seat without justification. "And let's not forget," Alicia concluded, "that his actions weren't just discriminatory, they were reckless. Imagine what could have happened if he allowed his bias to cloud his judgment during a critical flight decision." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. The airline's legal representative cleared his throat. "Ms. Bennett, based on the evidence you've provided, we have no choice but to take immediate disciplinary action. Captain Pierce will be grounded indefinitely while we conduct a full investigation." Captain Pierce was called into the room shortly after. He entered with his head held high, but his confidence faltered when he saw the stack of documents on the table and the stern expressions of the executives. "Captain Pierce," the executive began, "we've reviewed the allegations and evidence presented against you, Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty pending further investigation. Your actions today, combined with the existing complaints, have put the airline's reputation and passenger safety at risk. Pierce opened his mouth to protest, but Alicia spoke first. Accountability isn't optional, Captain. It's necessary. Perhaps it's time you reflect on that. For the first time, Pierce was silent. He glanced at Alicia, his expression a mix of anger and regret, before turning to leave the room. As the meeting concluded, the airline's executives turned to Alicia. "Ms. Bennett," one of them said, "we want to thank you for bringing this to our attention. Your diligence and professionalism have ensured that this matter was handled properly." Alicia nodded. "I only did what needed to be done. This airline deserves leaders who value integrity, not arrogance." Weeks later, Alicia received an email from the airline. Captain Pierce's investigation had been concluded, and he was officially terminated from his position. The airline issued a public statement reaffirming its commitment to respect, diversity, and accountability. Meanwhile, Alicia continued her work, knowing that this was just one victory in a much larger fight. She had no intention of stopping, because every step forward was a step toward a world where power was used responsibly and respect was given to all.